Welcome to our channel, where captivating stories come to life. I'm so glad you're here, and I'd love to know where you're watching from. Leave a comment below and share your location with us. We love connecting with our audience, and your support means the world. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss a new story. We've got something truly special coming tomorrow, and you won't want to miss it. Stay tuned, and let's dive into today's tale. This pregnant woman's silent savior was a Royal Guards horse. Welcome to the story where silence speaks, louder than words. This is the tale of Lieutenant Ethan Westfield, a 42-year-old Royal Guard stationed at the iconic Buckingham Palace, standing tall and unwavering in his sacred duty. For Ethan, each day is a reminder of the deep discipline, loyalty, and tradition that define his role as a protector of the monarchy. And by his side, always steady and vigilant, is his trusted companion, Valor, the horse whose silent strength matches his own. On this particular morning, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The sun glimmered softly over the palace grounds, and the world moved with its usual rhythm. Ethan stood firm, his posture impeccable, his eyes scanning the surroundings, keeping the Royal Guard's watchful eye intact. Valor, the majestic steed, stood beside him, calm, composed, and ready as always. But then something changed. Valor's ears perked up, his nostrils flared as he took a deep breath, and his body tensed. Ethan noticed it immediately. This wasn't a random reaction. This wasn't the usual restlessness that came with the daily bustle of tourists and guards. Valor was responding to something deeper, something instinctual. And that's when she appeared. A pregnant woman, visibly anxious and protective of her growing belly, walked toward them. Her steps were uncertain, her face pale with worry. She cradled her stomach with one hand, her other hand swaying nervously at her side. The crowd around her parted, whispers rising as she passed. But it wasn't just the fear that made Valor uneasy. His agitation grew with every step she took toward him. He began to stomp his hooves harder, pulling at his reins with urgency. Ethan could see the unease in the woman's eyes. "Please make him stop," she pleaded, her voice trembling. The crowd buzzed, but Ethan remained focused on his horse, whose instincts were far sharper than anything visible to the human eye. This wasn't about an external threat. No weapons, no signs of violence, yet Valor's behavior was louder than any warning bells. Something was terribly wrong. The woman was gently escorted to a nearby secure area for questioning. She kept repeating, "I didn't do anything wrong. I just want to go home." Her voice shaky with confusion. As Ethan led her to safety, he couldn't shake the feeling that Valor's reaction meant more than just a passing moment of anxiety. Valor had been trained for many things, but this was different. This was instinct. Inside the room, the woman was questioned gently, but her confusion only deepened. "Do you have any medical conditions we should know about?" a female officer asked. "No," she responded. "Just, I'm 7 months pregnant." And then, it happened. The woman's face twisted with pain. Her hands gripped her belly as she gasped, barely able to speak. "Something's wrong," she whispered, and before she knew it, she collapsed into a chair, her legs buckling beneath her. Sweat glistened on her forehead as her breathing became short and rapid. "Get medical support now," Ethan shouted, his voice urgent, his focus entirely on the woman in distress. The paramedics arrived, their movements swift. As one medic pressed a hand to her abdomen, his expression changed instantly. "This isn't labor," he muttered. "This is something else." And within moments, the diagnosis came: internal rupture. Critical, life-threatening. Without immediate action, both mother and child would be lost. Valor, outside the room, paced restlessly. His instincts never wavered, and neither did Ethan's. Valor had never reacted like this during drills, ceremonies, or state security operations. This wasn't training. This was life or death instinct. And so, with urgency and skill, the medical team worked quickly to save the woman. Her pulse was erratic, but thanks to Valor's sharp instincts, the timely intervention ensured that both she and her baby would survive. Later, when the crisis passed and the woman was stable, she turned to Ethan and whispered, "Thank you." Though her words were not meant for him, they were meant for Valor, the horse who had saved her life. Ethan stood still, watching his loyal companion. Valor's eyes were calm as they always were, but Ethan knew the truth. Sometimes, saving a life doesn't come from orders or commands. Sometimes it comes from a heart that simply refuses to ignore the silent cry for help. As the day carried on, the crowds returned to Buckingham Palace, unaware of the silent miracle that had taken place just hours before. But for Ethan and Valor, that moment would remain with them forever, a silent chapter in history, written not in books but in hearts. The true meaning of honor had been written that day, not through ceremony but through instinct, loyalty, and love, and that was the real legacy of their duty. The moment the paramedics rushed in, the room filled with tension. Ethan's heart raced as he stood in the doorway, his eyes never leaving the woman. Valor, still tethered outside, sensed the urgency, his restlessness growing as the minutes ticked by. Ethan's mind raced. Was this truly a medical emergency, or was there something deeper, something beyond his understanding? The medic pressed his hand to the woman's abdomen, his face falling as his fingers gently explored the delicate skin. The air grew heavy, and every second seemed to stretch longer than the last. Ethan could barely hear the muffled voices inside the room, but he could feel the intensity of the situation radiating out. "Internal rupture," the medic muttered, his voice laced with panic. "This isn't labor. If we don't act now, they'll both be gone." Ethan's gut clenched as the words hit him like a punch to the stomach. His gaze shot toward the door as if Valor could somehow sense the severity of the situation. Valor pawed at the ground, his body tense with anxiety. The horse had never been this agitated before. His instincts were screaming, telling Ethan that something was terribly wrong. Inside, the woman's breath became shallow, desperate. She gasped in pain, her face contorting as the strain of her condition took its toll. Sweat dripped from her forehead as she clutched her stomach, eyes wide with fear. She whimpered in agony, a sound that shook Ethan to his core. "Please," she whispered weakly, her voice barely audible over the chaos. "Help my baby." Every nerve in Ethan's body screamed for action. He couldn't wait. He had to do something. He could only stand there, helpless, unable to intervene in the way he so desperately wanted. His heart pounded, his thoughts swirling. He had seen chaos before, war zones, crises, conflicts, but nothing had ever struck him like this. This wasn't just a mission. This was life, a life being threatened in real time, and Ethan knew that if they didn't act fast, everything would be lost. Outside, Valor's behavior only worsened. He was now pushing against the door with his nose, his hooves scraping desperately against the floor. Ethan, locked in the moment, felt as if he could almost feel the horse's pain, his desperate need to protect, to act, to save. Then it happened. The woman cried out, a strangled sound that seemed to break through the thick air. Ethan's pulse quickened. "Get her on a stretcher, now!" he commanded, his voice sharp with urgency. The medical team worked quickly, their movements swift, but precise. They lifted the woman onto a stretcher, and without hesitation, they rushed her down the hallway toward the awaiting ambulance. Valor, still tethered outside, stood frozen. His eyes followed the woman, watching her every movement, never once breaking his gaze. Ethan could sense the deep bond, the unspoken connection between the two. Valor wasn't just a horse. He was more than that. He was an instinctual protector, and in that moment he knew, as much as Ethan did, that they had done the right thing. But the story wasn't over. Not yet. The ambulance doors slammed shut, and the vehicle sped off, the sirens blaring as it disappeared from sight. Ethan's thoughts were clouded with fear. Fear for the woman, fear for the child. He didn't know what to expect, what the outcome would be. But one thing was clear. Valor had sensed it first. Valor had known. He wasn't just a bystander in this story. He had been the catalyst that had saved them all. As the minutes dragged on, Ethan stood outside Buckingham Palace, waiting, hoping, praying. He ran his fingers through his hair, his mind replaying every moment of the morning. The pregnant woman, the horse's distress, the urgency of the situation. He had witnessed something extraordinary. Valor had saved lives without even realizing. But would it be enough? The waiting was unbearable. Every second felt like a lifetime. The minutes stretched on like hours, each second gnawing at Ethan's nerves. He stood outside the emergency room at Buckingham Palace, his mind racing as he watched the staff inside work frantically to save the woman and her baby. He couldn't shake the image of her face, twisted in pain, her fragile body trembling as she clutched her swollen belly. Every instinct in Ethan's body told him this wasn't just any emergency. It was something deeper, something that transcended protocol, transcended duty. Valor's reaction had said it all. The horse, normally as steady as a rock, had sensed something was terribly wrong. Valor, tethered outside, was pacing relentlessly, his hooves scraping against the cobblestones. His eyes, once calm and composed, were now wide and anxious. Ethan knew the horse. He could feel it. The bond between them was undeniable. Valor was restless not just because of the crowd or the situation. The horse knew. Valor's instincts were sharper than any human's, and his senses were screaming, trying to warn them of the danger they were facing. Ethan's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the ambulance doors slamming shut. His heart skipped a beat as the vehicle raced off, sirens blaring, carrying the woman to the hospital. The guard's post was eerily quiet now, the usual hum of activity replaced by a heavy silence. Ethan couldn't focus on anything but the woman, his mind fixated on her survival. Would she make it? Would the child survive? The questions haunted him, gnawing at his every thought. His hand tightened around the reins of Valor's harness, but the horse stood as still as ever, his eyes fixed on the path the ambulance had taken. The next few hours felt like an eternity. Ethan didn't move from his post. He couldn't. He had promised himself, promised Valor, that they would be there every step of the way. He owed it to the woman, owed it to the life they had saved. He owed it to the silent bond that had connected them all. Then finally the door to the hospital opened. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as a doctor emerged, his face unreadable. For a moment the air around them seemed to freeze. Ethan's mind raced. Had they made it? Were they alive? The doctor's expression softened, a glimmer of something, approaching relief flickering in his eyes. She made it, the doctor said, his voice a quiet reassurance. Both of them are stable now. Ethan exhaled, the weight of the world lifting from his shoulders. He hadn't realized just how tightly he had been holding his breath. Valor, too, seemed to sense the change. The horse stood, his muscles relaxing, though his eyes still darted nervously toward the hospital. Valor's instincts had been right. He had known. They both had. They had saved her life. The doctor continued, walking toward Ethan with a calm demeanor. There was an internal rupture, he explained. If she hadn't received medical attention when she did, neither she nor the baby would have survived. I don't know how your horse sensed it, but he saved their lives. Ethan's eyes softened as he looked down at Valor. The horse's gaze met his, calm, yet knowing. The bond between them was more than just a partnership. It was a silent understanding, a connection that transcended words or commands. Valor hadn't just reacted to the woman's distress. He had sensed the danger, acting long before anyone else could have realized it. A nurse walked up to Ethan, holding a small folded piece of paper. "This is for your horse," she said, handing it to him. Ethan opened it slowly, his heart tightening. As he read the simple, heartfelt message, "Tell the horse he's my angel." Ethan stood there in silence, reading the note again, the words heavy with emotion. He looked up at Valor, who stood quietly beside him, the horse's eyes calm but full of understanding. Ethan reached down and placed his hand gently on the horse's mane. "You felt it," he whispered. "You knew." And as the day continued, the crowd slowly returned to Buckingham Palace, unaware of the quiet miracle that had unfolded in their midst. But Ethan knew. Valor had saved a life today, not with orders or commands, but with something far more powerful. Instinct, loyalty, and love. It was a silent chapter in history that would never be written in the books. But for Ethan and Valor, it would live on forever, as a reminder that sometimes honor isn't found in the grand moments of history, but in the quiet acts of compassion that make all the difference. The hours seemed to drag on in slow motion. Ethan stood in front of the hospital, his gaze fixed on the entrance, unable to tear himself away. Valor, still calm but noticeably alert, stood next to him, his large frame quietly tethered to the post. Ethan couldn't shake the image of the woman's face, twisted in pain, her eyes pleading for help. That moment kept replaying in his mind, each image more vivid than the last. The weight of the situation was still heavy on Ethan's chest. His thoughts were filled with dread, questioning whether they had done enough. Was the woman and her baby really safe? Would they survive? Valor's agitation, his instinctive reaction, had warned them in a way that no words could. Ethan had been trained for combat, for crises, for the worst possible outcomes. But this was different. This was life. This was about saving someone from something far beyond his control. The street in front of the hospital remained eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded earlier. Ethan's eyes remained locked on the doors. He could feel Valor's steady gaze beside him, the horse's eyes reflecting the same anxious energy, as if they both were waiting for the same sign, something that would finally give them the clarity they desperately needed. As the minutes passed, Ethan could hear the hum of distant traffic, but it felt as though the world around him had slowed. His thoughts were scattered, consumed by the events of the day. The moment that Valor had reacted to the woman, the way the horse had sensed her pain long before anyone else had, echoed through Ethan's mind. He had trusted Valor instinctively, because the horse had never failed him before. And yet, there was always a part of him, buried deep inside, that questioned what they had truly just experienced. Had this all been a fluke, or had they stumbled upon something far greater? Then the sound of the hospital doors creaking open broke Ethan's reverie. His heart skipped a beat as a doctor emerged, his face unreadable. For a moment, time seemed to stand still, and Ethan's breath caught in his chest. Was this it? Was this the moment that would define everything? Had they succeeded in saving her? The doctor's eyes met Ethan's, and for just a split second, there was a shift, a softening, a flicker of something hopeful. Then the doctor spoke, his voice calm but filled with relief. "She made it," he said, his tone steady. "Both of them are stable now." Ethan exhaled sharply, his entire body sagging with relief. The tension that had held him in place all afternoon melted away. Valor, sensing the shift in the air, lowered his head, his muscles relaxing. Ethan placed a hand on the horse's mane, his fingers trembling slightly as he acknowledged what had just happened. They had done it. They had saved her. They had saved them both. The doctor approached, his expression softening further. "There was an internal rupture," he continued, his voice quiet but sure. "It was touch and go for a while. If she hadn't received medical attention when she did, she wouldn't have made it. Neither would the baby. But I don't know how your horse knew, but he saved their lives." Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. Valor had saved their lives, not with any order, not through any military protocol, but through something more profound, more primal. It had been Valor's instinct, something deep within the horse's being, that had guided them to act when no one else could sense the danger. The bond between them had gone beyond the ordinary. It was a connection based on loyalty, on trust, and most importantly, on love. A nurse approached then, a small piece of folded paper in her hand. She handed it to Ethan, her expression kind yet tinged with emotion. "It's for your horse," she said, her voice soft. Ethan unfolded the note carefully, his eyes scanning the simple words, "Tell the horse he's my angel." His heart tightened as he read the words, his mind racing with the realization that Valor's actions had meant more than just saving a life. It had meant everything to that woman, to that child. "Thank you," Ethan whispered, though he knew the words weren't meant for him. They were meant for Valor. The horse had done the impossible. He had acted when no one else could. As the sun began to set over Buckingham Palace, Ethan stood there with Valor by his side. The crowds had long dispersed, their attention drawn away by the evening's events, unaware of the quiet miracle that had unfolded. Ethan's eyes lingered on the horizon, his thoughts heavy but full of gratitude. He had seen the power of instinct, the strength of loyalty, and the depth of connection between man, animal, and the human spirit. As he stood there, silent but resolute, he realized that the true meaning of honor wasn't about ceremonies or accolades. It wasn't about the public recognition or the grand gestures that would fill the history books. True honor came from the quiet moments, the unseen actions that made the difference between life and death. It came from a heart that simply refused to ignore the silent cries for help, and that was something that could never be measured in any book of history. It could only be felt deep in the heart, where loyalty, love, and instinct held sway over everything else. The hospital room was still when Ethan and Valor stood outside waiting. The distant sounds of the city seemed muffled, like they were in a world of their own, isolated in this moment of quiet after the storm. The hours felt heavy, and though they had received the good news that the woman and her child were stable, Ethan couldn't shake the gnawing anxiety in his chest. Valor stood beside him, calm but alert, his eyes scanning the surroundings as if waiting for something more. Ethan felt a strange sense of unease. Was it truly over? Was it really enough? The weight of the situation hung on his shoulders. Moments like this, Ethan knew, he had to remain still. He couldn't let the turbulence of his own emotions cloud his judgment. He had always been trained to stand firm, to maintain control. But with Valor by his side, it felt different. There was something more powerful in their bond, something that transcended command and protocol. A nurse walked toward him, her expression soft but solemn. She was carrying a small piece of folded paper. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He knew, instantly, what it was. It was from the woman, from the one they had saved. She handed him the note, her eyes glistening with the weight of the situation. "She wanted you to have this," the nurse said quietly. "She said to tell the horse that he's her angel." Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he unfolded the note. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that no amount of training could prepare him for. "Tell the horse he's my angel." The words seemed to linger in the air long after. They were spoken. His fingers trembled slightly as he held the note, looking down at Valor, who stood as quietly as ever. The horse's eyes met his, calm but knowing, as though understanding the gravity of the situation in a way that no one else could. "Good boy," Ethan whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He placed a hand on Valor's mane, his mind racing, with the realization of just how much this moment meant. Valor hadn't just been a companion on duty, he had been a lifesaver. In a world filled with rules and protocols, Valor had reacted purely on instinct. No commands, no directives, just an understanding that something was wrong, something deeper than anyone could comprehend. As Ethan stood there, lost in the moment, a doctor approached him, his steps deliberate but measured. The man's expression was unreadable at first, but then he offered a small, reassuring smile. "She made it through," the doctor said. "Both mother and baby are stable now. The rupture was serious, but the timing couldn't have been better. She got the help she needed in time." Ethan exhaled, the relief washing over him like a wave. Valor's ears twitched as though he, too, felt the tension lift. Ethan looked down at the horse, a sense of awe settling over him. Valor had saved them. He had known long before anyone else did. It was as if the bond between them transcended all the noise of the world, an unspoken connection that spoke louder than any words or commands. The doctor continued, his tone soft but genuine. "I don't know how your horse knew, but he saved them. That's the kind of instinct I've never seen before in any animal. You're lucky to have him." Ethan nodded, his throat tightening with emotion. He wasn't sure how to respond, or even if he could find the words. What could he say? Valor had done what no one else could have done. He had acted when there was no time to waste, saved lives without even realizing it. The true meaning of honor wasn't in the uniforms, the ceremony, or the grand speeches. It was in moments like these, when instinct, loyalty, and love became the most powerful force of all. As the day drew to a close, the crowds at Buckingham Palace began to return, blissfully unaware of the miracle that had just unfolded. But Ethan knew, Valor knew, and as he stood beside his horse, ready to return to his post, Ethan couldn't help but feel that in the quietest of moments, in the most unassuming of actions, true honor was found. It was found not in the history books, but in the heartbeat of instinct, the pull of loyalty and the compassion that binds us all together. As the sun began to set over Buckingham Palace, casting a golden glow across the courtyard, Ethan stood silently, his hand resting on Valor's mane. The bustling crowds of tourists returned, unaware of the miracle that had unfolded earlier. To them, it was just another ordinary day at the palace, a chance to snap a few photos and glimpse the royal guard standing stoically in their iconic uniforms. But Ethan knew better. He knew that what had happened earlier that day was anything but ordinary. The air was still heavy with emotion, and though he stood at attention, his thoughts kept drifting back to the woman they had saved. The bond that had been forged, not by orders or commands, but by instinct, was something that could never be erased. Valor had saved her and her child without hesitation, his actions guided by something far more powerful than simple duty. It was a silent understanding that spoke volumes, a reminder that loyalty and love could go beyond the confines of duty. As the evening light faded, Ethan felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. He glanced down at Valor, the horse standing strong and composed beside him, just as he always did. But there was a softness in the horse's eyes now, a quiet recognition of what they had accomplished. Ethan's heart swelled with pride as he thought of the bond they shared, a bond that went beyond the uniform, beyond the roles they played. Valor had shown him what true loyalty meant. Just then, a soft voice broke through his thoughts. "Lieutenant Westfield?" Ethan turned, surprised to see a young officer standing a few feet away. The officer's expression was somber, his hands clasped behind his back. "Sir," the officer said, his tone respectful but carrying a hint of awe, "I heard what happened earlier. I just wanted to thank you and your horse for everything you did today." Ethan blinked, taken aback by the officer's words. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice low but steady. "The woman," the officer continued, his eyes briefly glancing at Valor before returning to Ethan. "We all know what happened. How your horse, how Valor, saved her life. The news is already spreading. It's not in the papers yet, but it will be." Ethan's heart raced again, a rush of emotions flooding his chest. He hadn't thought about the public response. He hadn't even considered how others would view the events of the day. For him, it had been a personal victory, a moment of connection between him and Valor, and the woman they had saved. But now, the reality of the situation was setting in. The world would soon know what had happened. "And what are you going to say?" Ethan asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "How do you explain something like this?" The officer looked at Ethan, his eyes filled with understanding. "I don't think there's a way to explain it," he said. "It's not about the protocols or the training. It's about something deeper. Valor sensed something no one else did, and it saved lives." Ethan nodded slowly, the weight of the officer's words sinking in. He had always known that Valor was special, but he hadn't fully grasped the depth of the bond they shared until now. It wasn't just about duty or discipline. It was about trust. Trust in something that couldn't be measured, something that went beyond the training and the routine of their daily posts. As the officer walked away, leaving Ethan and Valor standing alone once more, Ethan's mind lingered on the words. The world would soon know, but more than that, they would understand something deeper. Valor's actions had transcended everything they had been trained to do. It was an act of instinct, of love, and of loyalty, an act that saved lives and proved That true honor didn't always come from grand gestures or speeches. Sometimes it came from the quiet moments, the silent acts of compassion that made all the difference. Ethan stood there for a while longer, the crowds passing by, their laughter and chatter filling the air. But in that moment, all he could hear was the steady rhythm of Valor's breathing, a comforting reminder that some things, some bonds, couldn't be broken, and that was the true meaning of honor. The following day brought a steady hum of activity at Buckingham Palace. The crowds were back, snapping photos, chatting excitedly among themselves, and oblivious to the miracle that had unfolded just the day before. But Ethan wasn't thinking about them. He wasn't thinking about the tourists or the passing time. His mind was still with the woman, with Valor, and with the life-changing moment they had shared. As Ethan stood at his post, the weight of the event still clung to him. Though he wore his uniform with the usual stoic composure, there was something different in the way he carried himself. Something had shifted inside him. Valor, too, seemed to sense the change. The horse stood tall and calm, his ears flicking occasionally, but there was a quiet understanding between them, as if they were both guarding a secret that no one else could comprehend. Lieutenant Westfield. Ethan's attention snapped to the voice calling out to him. It was the same officer who had approached him the day before. This time the officer's face was serious, his steps more measured. "Sir," the officer said, stopping just a few feet away. "You'll want to hear this." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What's going on?" The officer hesitated for a moment before speaking, as if weighing his words. "The woman, the one you and Valor saved. She's been asking for you. She wants to thank you. She says she'll be here soon, with her child." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected this. The events of the day before had already felt like a lifetime ago. And now, the woman wanted to meet him again? He wasn't sure how to feel. He had been focused on his duty, on ensuring that everything was handled as it should be. But now, the personal side of the situation was catching up with him. "She wants to thank Valor, too," the officer added, noticing the shift in Ethan's expression. "She's already written a note for him." The officer handed Ethan a small, folded piece of paper, just like the one from yesterday. Ethan's fingers brushed over the paper, feeling the weight of it in his hands. The note from yesterday had been a simple message, but the sentiment had been so powerful, so deeply felt. "And now, another note. Thank you," Ethan said, taking the paper from the officer. But his mind was racing. Was he ready for this moment? He wasn't sure. He had done his job. He had acted when it was necessary. Valor had saved a life. That was the duty of a royal guard, after all. But this was something different. It was personal. It was a moment that didn't fit neatly into any rule book or regulation. Before he could dwell on it further, the sound of footsteps approached. The officer stepped back as a woman, flanked by a nurse and a small, bundled bundle in her arms, emerged from the doorway. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. She was smiling, but there was a depth to her smile, a mixture of gratitude, relief, and emotion that was impossible to ignore. Her gaze met Ethan's, and then shifted to Valor. Ethan watched as the woman took a few tentative steps forward, carefully holding the baby in her arms. She stopped just a few feet away from Valor, her eyes softening as she reached out. The baby cooed in her arms, blissfully unaware of the gravity of the situation. She looked up at Ethan, her voice gentle but filled with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saving us." Ethan swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. He looked down at Valor, who stood still, his head lowered slightly as if acknowledging the woman's gratitude. Valor's instincts had been sharp, but now, in this moment, it was clear that there was something more profound at work. Valor had been the protector, not just of the palace, but of a life. The woman then gently placed the note on the ground before Valor, a small offering of thanks. As she did, she turned back to Ethan, her eyes sparkling with unshed tears. "I'll never be able to repay you," she said quietly, "but I promise you, I'll never forget what you both did." Ethan, suddenly overwhelmed by the weight of the moment, finally spoke, his voice steady but quiet. You don't need to repay us, just take care of your child. That's all the thanks we need." The woman smiled, nodding as she carefully stepped back, her gaze lingering on Valor one last time. She didn't say another word, but her presence seemed to speak volumes. And just like that, she was gone, leaving Ethan and Valor alone once again. As the silence settled around them, Ethan exhaled slowly. He realized then that, in saving her, they had done more than fulfill their duty. They had touched a life, and in return, had received something far more meaningful than recognition: gratitude, and the unspoken bond between a soldier, his horse, and the life they had saved. Thank you so much for watching this incredible story unfold. We hope it touched you as much as it did us. It's moments like these, moments of pure instinct, loyalty, and compassion, that remind us of the deeper connections we share with others, even in the most unexpected circumstances. Now, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you think of Valor's incredible instincts and the bond he shared with Lieutenant Westfield? How do you think animals like Valor can sense danger or emotions that we humans often miss? And what about the woman's journey? How did her story of pain and hope resonate with you? We encourage you to leave your comments below, whether it's a simple thought, a reflection on the story, or a deeper discussion about the powerful themes of loyalty and survival. Let's continue this conversation together. Also, if you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We've got more heartwarming stories, profound life lessons, and moments of connection coming your way every week. We can't wait to share them with you. Thank you again for being part of our journey. Your support means everything to us.